good evening. Tonight we're going to be doing a wheel bearing on a 2012 Mazda 5. I already got the wheel off, and I'm going to take you through the whole process. So stay tuned, and I'll show you all the steps that it takes to get the bearing out from behind that nut right there. Second video on the Mazda here. We went ahead and got the brake rotor off, the brake caliper sitting there. Make sure to support it so the hose doesn't get overextended there. We took off the axle nut, which is this nut right here, that holds the hub, which is this piece right here, into the bearing, which is inside that housing called the knuckle. So what I did here now is I'm going to attach my slide hammer, and once that's all loose, I'm going to take it and whack it back, and it will knock that hub right out of the bearing. And I'll show you what that looks like when it comes out. And just like that, the hub is out of the bearing. This is the actual bearing inside here. You can see the ball bearings from the old one. There's a snap ring, which there's the ring piece right there and there. Those two will come together, and then you can pop the ring out, and then we will press that whole bearing out, which I'll show you that process as well. After using the slide hammer, here's what the hub looks like when it came off. Slide hammer's there. So what you're seeing here is the hub and the outer race of the bearing. So what I'm going to have to do is I have to remove this part of the bearing because the new bearing has one on it already. So I need to press this one off and press this hub into the new bearing. And to get this off, since this is a press fit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cutoff wheel and I'm actually going to cut a groove in it, and then I'll hit it with the chisel and it will spread that open, and then I should be able to slide it right off. So I'll show you how that's done here in just a little while. Moving right along on the bearing. So I have the CV axle taken out of the hub, or out of the knuckle. So there's a pinch bolt that goes through there that pinches the lower ball joint into place. So you take that out, and then this, you tap on it with the hammer and it'll slide down. And then once that's removed, this whole knuckle can move out enough that that axle can actually go back through that hole, and then I set it over to the side here. So now I have free access to put my press tool in from the back and to be able to press that bearing out, and that's what I'm going to do next here. Also, I ended up cutting the notch in this bearing. You can see how I just took my cutoff wheel, cut off a chunk of that, and then I hit it with my chisel, just like that. And what happens is it splits. You can see that crack right in it right there. And so now that whole hub just slides right off. And now this hub is ready to install into the new bearing, which will set that down over there. Here's an example of the old bearing from the other side, what it looks like pressed out. The new bearing is going to be right in here, and we're going to get that, the old bearing pressed out with my Harbor Freight Special of the wheel bearing removal kit. So I'll show you how to set that up here shortly. Okay, we got the snap ring out that goes in there to trap that bearing into place. So we got that out, which is actually kind of a pain in the butt. But so now we put the press tool in. So we slide this in from behind, and that will sit on the bearing nicely. And then I put these pieces on the outside, and it sits on the outside of that hub nicely. And then when I tighten that down, it'll press the bearing right out into this sleeve. So I'll show you what that looks like when the bearing comes out. Bearing is pressed out. So what I had to end up doing is I put my adjustable wrench on the nut on the inside, broke it loose, started tightening this down, and then it got to the point that that nut got sucked into the knuckle enough that this popped off. So I had to switch my ratchet back there with the socket on it. And so now I will take that off, and this bearing should pop right out of there, which it did. So you can kind of see, and there's the bearing. You can kind of see how the back one fits in there, and then it just pulls it right out. So that's the cavity where the bearing used to be, and then I will just use the same tool to just push it in backwards and push that right in, the new one right in. So I'll show you how that goes here in just a second. All right, I'm set up to press in the new bearing, which I've got here. You can see there's two different sides to it. Just got to pay attention to how it got brought out. Make sure to put it in the same way. I know this goes to the inside, so it goes in like that. So inside there, you can see I have my press tool, if it'll focus back there. but that's set against the back of the hub, so I'll be able to push this in. So I'll just put a touch of anti-seize on that bearing, and then once I get that to set in there, I will use a similar bolt and get that right into place. And I'll tighten that down, it'll suck that bearing right in, and I'll show you kind of what it looks like when it's about halfway in, so you can kind of get an idea what that looks like. Here we are about halfway pressed in. You can see how on the back I got my wrench on the socket there and my tool, and then as I tighten this nut down, it just pushes the bearing right into the knuckle. It'll go into where it was before, and then there should be room for that snap ring right there to hold it in place and trap it into place. So I'll show you what that looks like when it goes back all together. New bearing is installed. You can see the snap ring is also installed right up here. It's all good to go, pressed in nice and tight. So now with the same method that I used to push in that bearing, I'm going to push the hub into that new bearing. Just got to make sure to get that snap ring in there first, because you won't get it once you get the hub in. And then once we get this hub in, we just put it all back together, and the bearing is basically done. I'll show you what that looks like when it's all together. Hub is installed. As you can see, there's not a lot of room back there. Basically impossible to put that snap ring in once it's in there. But it pressed in nice and good. It's nice and quiet. So all I got to do is lower my lower ball joint again, put my CV axle in through, put the shroud on, put my rotor on, torque my axle nut, put the caliper on, and that's basically it. I'm also going to do a sway bar end link on this, so I won't get it completely back together. But that's kind of the end for how the bearing goes in. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. I'm happy to answer any questions too if anybody's got them. Have a good day.